Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to this Mercy Bound On series. Today, we're going to have a special guest, Dr. Ray Guarendi. He's been on before. Mercy Unbound hopes to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. Dr. Ray is doing so much work as a psychologist and writing more books. And I got him back today to talk about his book, Taught by 10. A psychologist's father learns from his 10 kids. If you think about it, fathers are supposed to be teaching the kids, but yet we learn from them. I don't have 10, Ray. I've got 7, but as I get older, I realize it's a two-way street. And welcome back to Mercy Unbound.
Hey, always glad to be with you, Brian. Thanks.
You give guidance in your books on marriage, relationships, children, and it's like my oldest daughter is a doctor of psychology, and we both look at each other and say we all need healing, and there's never going to be a shortage of work because we're human. But what led you to write this book?
Well, I figure it this way. All those years that I spent all that money on those 10 kids, I had to get something in return. If I sell enough books, I can break even. Short of that, I'll just tell them, you guys, I don't get the tax deductions for you anymore. So really, it's financially a losing proposition here. So hopefully the book will help me break even. Now, if it doesn't, if I only make up about 3 of the kids' worth, I told the other kids, I say, well, no offense, but probably not going to get any wedding gifts.
Yeah. Now, which leads me to the next question. Where can they get your book?
If they go to my website, drray.com, DRRAY.com. It's there along with 17 other books. Brian, I learned the secret to writing a lot of books. You can't worry about them being very good. If you worry about quality, it really slows you down. So I got some scratch and sniff there too, Well, but don't scratch and sniff in the potty training. That's all I would say.
Yeah. We've had you on before, and we've talked about your other books, and I've thoroughly enjoyed them, and I've given them to my kids, and just keeping up the great work. It's good to have you back for sure. Tell us why you said stronger parents who act more and lecture less have smoother family lives. When did you come to that conclusion, or how did you see that light?
There is a mindset among the mental health types that basically says, well, if you have authority, if you're confident and you're clear in your expectations and you follow through with consequences, you're risking your child's well-being. Psychologically speaking, that is. They will become Stepford children. I will obey you, Dad, even though I hate you. What I've noticed as a clinician over and over again, parents will come into my office, and once they get control of a child who's driving them nuts, they find that not only is their family life better, but they'll say, he came up to me last week and told me how much he loved me, and he hasn't done that in 5 months. Or he hugged me and he kissed me. And I said, now, you're exerting more discipline authority, are you not? Yes. Were you worried that somehow you would squash his spirit if you were a stronger parent? Yes. Has that happened? No, the exact opposite has happened. Right. Strong, confident parents have a more peaceful family life, and they have a much better relationship with their child. The ugliest relationships I have seen, Brian, are those where the parents are not in control. It can get very nasty from both directions.
I've got friends my age, older generation, we've all got grandkids now, and sometimes we shudder at how our kids don't have any discipline with their kids. And we just, and it's true. They just run around, have no control over the kids. And it's this mindset, isn't it, that
there has been a massive shift in the last generation or two, Brian, regarding how to properly raise children. Authorities become a dirty word. Parents are much more frightened of doing something psychologically incorrect. They generally tend to be much more loose, allowing the child to follow his impulses and his whims, lest they suffocate his desires. And what this has resulted in is many grandparents like you saying to me, I would like to spoil my grandchildren, but I can't because they're already difficult and I don't want to add to it. Yes, you put your finger on a very generational epidemic.
You know, I have to say, in some ways, my wife was the better parent in a way, because she always focused on consistency. Where does that play in all this when we talk about kids?
Parents will say, if I were consistent, I would be on him constantly. And I will say it's the exact opposite. If you are consistent, you actually discipline much less. You're predictable. The child knows what you're going to do. When a parent says, I would be on him constantly, what they're saying, Brian, is that I am on him with my words constantly. I'm nagging, I'm reasoning, I'm rewarding, I'm reminding. I'm using all kinds of words and I am on him constantly. That's exactly right, but you're not disciplining. Disciplining is, here's the expectation, and here's what I'm going to do. We don't have to fight about it. I'm going to enforce it. And I tell parents, if you know that, and the child knows that, you will discipline much less. Somebody asked my wife once, back when we had 3 or 4 kids in the house, what would you do if one of your children, after you said, go to the corner, please, looked at you and refused? And my wife said, I don't know. And the other woman said, what do you mean you don't know? She said, well, I'd have to think about it because it's never happened. And the woman said, how could it never happen? And my wife said, well, very, very early on, we made it clear that if you refuse going to the corner, there will be many consequences that will happen. So it got to the point by the time they were 3 or 4 where Randy just had to say, go to the corner, please. And they went, not because she was an autocrat, but because they had a few years of learning, I'd better go or else there will be many more consequences.
Where does the famous look come into all this?
The look is dead, Brian. Remember the look? You know, you would know this. You remember Pavlov? Does the name Pavlov ring a bell?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Pavlov basically said there's a principle that we now label classical conditioning. He sounded a bell, then he fed dogs. Pretty soon, the bell got the dogs to salivate. They didn't even need the food anymore. Well, the look is a form of classical conditioning. When parents said, I had the look, they meant when I gave my kids a certain warning look, if they didn't cooperate, consequences would follow, discipline would follow. So pretty soon, all you had to do is have the look. You didn't even have to discipline. If, for example, your kids are with a bunch of their cousins and they're all carrying on at grandma's house, and they get kind of rambunctious, and you glance over at your 7-year-old son and he sees you glancing at him, he reads that look because he knows in the past that look has meant dad is going to do something here shortly, son, if you don't settle down. So all you have to do is look. There's no authority in a look. The authority comes from the history of the look. The look was paired with action. Now the look is sufficient.
Do you think some of the problem is with the word discipline, that people think discipline right away? They think of corporal punishment, and that's a taboo in today's society. But there's other forms of discipline. I mean, I think of my wife, the middle schoolers, they'd be writing Bible verses or stuff like that. There's many forms of discipline, aren't there?
The experts have done a wonderful job of making certain words psychologically tainted. Authority, discipline, limits, cooperation. They've taken these words, compliance, they've taken these words and they've made them sound like you shouldn't have to do that if you're a savvy enough parent. You should be able to talk to your child. You should be able to use iMessages. You should be able to use a proper sticker chart. You should be able to set up win-win scenarios, and the child will respond. Oh, Father, I've been so blind. Of course, I see what you're saying. Thank you for reasoning with me about this. Just recently, I heard an expert, a very high-profile Christian expert, say that if you discipline a child, you're not teaching them anything. All you're doing is showing them they have to comply with your limits and your discipline. You need to teach them what you want. You need to teach them virtue. And I remember talking to the radio and saying, well, it's going to be very hard to teach anybody anything if there are not limits to their conduct. You can't teach them anything if they're out of control.
That's for sure. I mean, I think of situations raising our own kids and they're out of control. That's not the time to sit there and talk to them. It just doesn't happen. But
we've made discipline a dirty word.
Yeah.
It is a word that the irony here, Brian, is if you don't have a loving, firm, confident discipline, you get ugly as a parent. You say things you would never say to any other human being. You go to confession and you say, bless me, Father. I was a holy person before I had children. I was pretty nice. Now I'm not pretty and I'm not nice. That's what happens. It's automatic. It follows. Parents will say, can you be too strict? I'll say, well, it depends how you define strict. If you define strict as having high standards, no, you can't be too strict. You know, what's a high standard? You're not allowed to lie. Well, wait a minute. That's kind of a high standard, isn't it? Maybe he should have 3 lies per week. You don't want to say no lying. That's unreachable. You can be too harsh. That's where most people confuse being too strict. Yelling, arguing, screaming, threatening. That's nasty. That's not strict. That's weak.
And then again, when you're acting that way, when the parents have lost it, they're not doing it at that point out of love. But you can discipline with love, can't you? I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do, is be firm and yet do it all things out of love?
There's a big difference between principled discipline, which is, I'm going to do this because I want to teach you self-control. You don't punch your sister. And here's what I'm going to do. You're 6 years old. You really don't understand the rationale not to punch your sister. So I'm going to teach you, if you punch your sister, Dad's going to do something about it. And then hopefully you'll develop self-control. So when you're 9, you'll realize, gee, I shouldn't punch my sister because she's my sister. Okay, that's principled discipline. Reactive discipline is, I've had enough. You people have got on my nerves. And then you act because you're mad. That's not principled discipline. That's just reactive discipline.
You know, and one of the other issues I think in America is there's so much anger and pent up. People are just messed up in a way that they're carrying so much anger that they just explode in a tenth of a second. How do you break that in parents or young parents? You know, it's like we got to break this cycle of keeping the thermometer down and disciplining out of love.
There are several ways that parents get frustrated in discipline. The first one is they've lost sight of what children are. The most common adjective now leveled at children is way overblown. And that adjective, Brian, is strong-willed. No, your child is not strong-willed. Your child is a child. Your child wants to do what he wants to do, and you're in the way. Now, if you want to call that strong-willed, because to say a child is strong-willed means he doesn't want to cooperate. Well, of course he doesn't. He's a kid. Why would he want to cooperate? So that's one. You've lost sight of what kids really are, that they do need a lot of structure and guidance. Two, you wait too long to discipline. You know, he's been badgering his sister for the last 17 minutes, and you've yelled into that room 13 times. You're not going to say, excuse me, Conan, I'm beginning to feel anger pangs. And I think if you mistreat your sister for maybe another 14 minutes, I'm going to be compelled to raise my voice. No. You want to go in there firing a bazooka because you're frustrated. Another reason you're frustrated, you future project. You find out that your 9-year-old has just pilfered a Matchbox car from the drugstore. Uh-oh. What does this mean? Is he going to be a thief? Is he turning his back on everything I've tried to teach him? Am I a failure as a parent? What is happening here? No, your kid at age 9 took a car from a drugstore. Okay, let's deal with it. Let's do what we got to do. We take it back. We discipline him. We make him write a letter of apology to the store owner, and we move on. But see, what happens is because we're so psychologically obsessed that we think, oh, what does it mean? I'll give you a small example why parents get frustrated. Way, I'd say 90+%, 95% of parents are giving smartphones years too early, years. This is the most devastating thing you can do to undercut your parenting and trying to teach morals and virtue is to give a smartphone way too early. But they do it. They do it because many of them don't want to do it, but they're afraid. My daughter's 13. She's the only one in her class who doesn't have one. What is she going to do when other kids want to communicate with her? My mother says she'll feel isolated. She'll be resentful of me. She'll get sneaky and deceptive if I don't do this. So what happens is instead of making the kinds of decisions with confidence that they need to make, they parent in fear. They get very frustrated and very afraid, and they yield. Those are some of the more common reasons that parents get frustrated fast.
Now, Dr. Ray, with your 10 kids, you know, they all are unique. They're all different. They're at different ages. Walk us through for those with kids maybe at different ages. When you talk, give some suggestions for discipline. You know, you don't discipline a 5-year-old the way you do a 15-year-old, I assume.
There's some simple principles, Brian. First is the easier it is, the more likely you are to do it. The more likely you are to do it, the better it will work. And the better it works, the less you have to do it. So I tell parents, most behavior problems, let's say we got kids under 10, most behavior problems are clustering in a group. Disrespect, temper eruptions, homework hassles, chore shirking, bedtime bad times, meal ordeals. So that gobbles up about 90% of what kids do to misbehave. Pick a couple very simple consequences. I always tell parents, for the kids under 5, 6, 7, corner. Use the corner. Very simple. You got 4 corners in every room. You fill them up. You got another room. That was a problem in our house. Our corners got backlogged. You know, we used to have a halfway couch program. So you can use the corner. You can use the steps. You can sit them on a chair. It's very simple. As they get a little bit older, I like things like 50 sentences. I will talk to my brother with respect. Or an essay. I want you to write an essay, 100 words, 200 words, depending on the age, 400 words, why you're grateful to live here. I like essays. They are conscience on paper. It is a ridiculous notion that says if you have a child write an essay, you're going to turn them off toward writing. That's absurd. There's no research support for that anywhere. That's just another one of those air-filled theories that the shrink types come up with that make parents afraid to use any kind of consequence. If you sit him in a chair, is he going to become chair phobic? If you make him apologize to his sister, is he going to hate women? If you make him do his chores, is he going to hate work? If you make him eat his vegetables, is he going to hate vegetables? I mean, all of this as a parent is somewhat force. You got to do this. So simple consequences. I find many parents will say to me when their kids are, say, at age 15, and they have a smartphone, which about 98% at age 15 have a smartphone, which is not real smart. And the parents will say, well, I caught her texting some pretty vile messages to this boy. Or she snuck the phone up to her bedroom at night and she was up till 3 a.m. How long should I take the phone? And I say, the question is not how long you should take the phone. The question is, has she shown herself trustworthy enough to have a phone? And that's what I say with parents. Parents will say, well, I'll take his driving privileges away, or I'll take his phone away, or I'll take this particular privilege on the computer away. I say, well, the question is, sometimes, have they shown you that they are responsible enough to have that privilege at that age? You have to decide as a parent. Well, how are they ever going to show me they're trustworthy enough if I don't give it back? You're a parent. You can make that judgment. You can see if the time span has been long enough, if the child has been cooperative enough. They don't look at you like you're the Neanderthal throwback of 1822 and I got stuck with you, mother. And as long as you take my smartphone away from me, I'm not going to talk to you. Then he's telling you he's not trustworthy enough to have that smartphone back.
Right. You know, one of the issues perhaps in our earlier marriage, I mean, we've been married over 40 years, so I'm thinking back on this one, but
you got married in kindergarten.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I got you.
But was consistency. And I think there were times where I would disagree with what my wife was doing. So I'm like, I got to show that that's crazy, you know? And then over time, I realized it's more important really for consistency, isn't it? Than anything, just having a united front of parents.
There's two definitions of consistency. The one is meaning what you say and following through. With that definition, most parents are somewhere between 10 and 25% consistent. And that's typically enough to raise a child discipline-wise. It is. None of us are 50% consistent, because if you tell him to pick up his coat twice and you don't do anything about it, you're already down to 33%. So, but the other one is between spouses. My wife and I had a simple rule that helped us out a lot. The parent with the discipline rules. For example, my wife had this thing that they shouldn't burp the alphabet at the table. Now, I, being a good father, I liked when my boys could burp the alphabet on one breath all the way up to the letter M. I mean, I think that's talent. That's real talent. She didn't like that. So if they did that, she sent them away from the table. Okay, that's her rule. I got that part of it. All right. So what I tell parents most of the time is, neither one of you really is very consistent. So the person who is more consistent can rule, and you don't have to worry about them being too strict or overbearing, because they're just less permissive than you are. That's all. Because parents will say that. They'll say, well, you know, I just think that maybe he's a little too hard on him. And then I'll ask, I'll say, well, is he a mean father? Oh, no, he's a very loving father. Well, is he harsh with his words, with his emotions? Oh, no. Well, then what is he doing? Well, he sends them to the corner for things I wouldn't send them to the corner for. Okay, that's dad. Dad will send you to the corner for that stuff. Mom doesn't. All right, there's no problem there. The trouble comes in, Brian, where the disagreement stems, you're not being psychologically correct. It's not a matter of we disagree as parents on how to handle that problem. You're wrong, psychologically speaking. And that's where an awful lot of conflict comes in between good parents.
Yeah, I think too, it's like maybe the male sometimes I have to show my authority, but mom's there all day with them, and she's really the one with the authority. And I'd have to, sometimes dads need to acquiesce a little bit to mom and work together more. But
I am hearing more women tell me that they are the main authorities in their home, that they set the rules, they set the discipline, they set the terms, they set the standards. And a Disney dad over here, Mr. Good Time, Mr. Laid Back, Mr. Honey, I was that way when I was a kid. I think I turned out pretty good. And the women are thinking, let's gather the relatives and vote.
yeah,
What I tell the men is, if you don't like your wife's style, if she talks too much, if she negotiates too much, if she nags too much, etc., she still has authority. Her style may not be good, but she has authority. She's mom. The best thing you can do is back her up. Best thing you can do is to let her know you are right there beside her rather than second guessing her. Now, on the other hand, I tell the males, don't get into this habit. If she has a habit of talk, talk, nag, nag, repeat, repeat, negotiate, talk, talk, nag, nag, repeat, repeat, negotiate, your habit is tolerate, tolerate, oblivious, oblivious, ignore, ignore, kill, tolerate, tolerate. Don't do that. You're disciplining because you've had enough, as opposed to disciplining at the beginning because it's wrong. Women will allow guys to be better disciplinarians if they don't see us as intimidating, scary monsters, that our authority comes from beating our chest and growling, as opposed to, no, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to happen. Women are more likely to let guys be stricter if they don't think the guy is excessively nasty about it.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Ray, one of the problems I see is people don't know how to resolve conflict. Any thoughts on raising kids so that they can resolve and even avoid conflict?
You have rules. In other words, the experts will say things like this: let children solve their own conflicts. Let them work it out themselves. If it's a sibling brawl, let them figure it out. Now, I typically have the experience that that's horrible advice, because the dominant child will win. The smarter child will win. The trickier child will win. The more slick child will win. The more intense child will win. I tell parents, if you want them to solve their conflicts, set the boundaries. You can't mistreat. You can't hurt. You can't taunt. You can't name call. You can't do anything to be disrespectful to a brother or sister. Now, solve it in between that. If you're fighting over a toy, however you work it out does not involve yelling at each other. It does not involve grabbing it. It does not involve pushing the other one down, because if you do, I'm going to discipline. Those are my terms. Now, short of that, you're going to be forced to either figure out how to resolve this, or you're going to lose the privilege you had. So I think if you set the boundaries, it's kind of like a cage match. The boundaries are set. The limits are put in by mom and dad. We had a rule in our house when the kids were growing up. At one point, Brian, they were 12 and under, all 10 of them. We had a rule. You're not allowed to mistreat a sibling at all. In any way, you are not allowed to mistreat a sibling. We are not going to follow the rule of, oh, well, you know, that's what brothers and sisters do. That's how it's sibling rivalry. They can act that way, but you know, they're the best of friends in the end. No, 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 no. No, you don't mistreat somebody. It's that simple. Now, short of that, you can work out all your conflicts any way you want, as long as no mistreatment's involved.
You know, with 10 children, I'm sure they're all different. They're all unique. Can you share with us just some thoughts on how your parenting may be different with number 1 versus number 3 versus number 9, or how you had to look at things a little differently?
My children are all adopted, so they all come from wildly diverse genetic and historical backgrounds. Some of them have been heavily drug exposed in the womb. Some of them were neglected early in life. Some of them had fairly smooth beginnings. And that showed itself, Brian. It showed itself in their temperament. Some of my children responded well to parenting. They absorbed it. They took it in. Others, much more slowly. They had to be monitored. They had to be supervised. I'll give you a small example. Some of my children could drive at age 16. Others were not permitted to drive at age 16. And the interesting thing about that is that the 16-year-old was driving before his brother, who was 18. And the 18-year-old brother saw that. Now, obviously, we explained it to him. We said, we have to decide when we think you're trustworthy enough to drive. And they didn't like it. Of course, they didn't like it. But they eventually got used to the idea. But we had to parent according to each of their abilities to absorb our parenting. I had one mother tell me, she said, you know, you're not as good a parent as your best kid. And you're not as bad a parent as your worst kid. I had some children that made me seem like I was God's gift to parenthood. And I had other children that, well, if I took them out in public, I was going to lose business, you know? So that's just the nature of the temperament. And parents have to understand the power of temperament. They will say to me, well, you know, our first 2 children, we never had any of these problems. Now this third one, I can't believe what he's throwing at us. I go, yeah, that's who he is. Yeah, but what we did worked with the other 2. Yeah, it did. Counted as a bonus. You're going to have to be more supervisory with this one. You're going to have to be more consistent. You're going to have to follow through better. And you're going to have to watch over him because in a lot of ways, he resists your parenting. That's who he is. He's wired that way. Okay, that's your child. You're responsible for doing the best you can to raise the best kids you can, given the way he is wired.
Any of your children special needs children, Ray?
If you define it by the adoption world, many of them are. Now, special needs in the adoption world is anything that is not a child of your race, that has no risk factors, or is not part of a sibling group, or is not older. So, for example, 3 of my children are Black. All right, they would be considered special needs. They're in a white family. 2 of them are biracial. They would be considered special needs. They're in a white family. Several of them were drug exposed in the womb. Okay, they would be special needs because they were drug exposed in the womb. 4 of them we adopted older, so they would be considered special needs because we adopted them older. That's a very narrow definition of special needs. If you say, are they special needs in the sense that there were extreme differences in the way we had to parent them, then I would say none of them were special needs. Yeah, they had their own quirks. They had their own temperaments. They had their own learning problems. They had their own maturity levels, but that's all within the realm of raising any batch of kids. So even though the adoption world would call them special needs, my wife and I really didn't.
Yeah. And the reason I was asking, if you had any thoughts or suggestions for people with special needs children of
Sure.
have to look at things differently.
One of the traps that parents fall into is that he is special needs. Therefore, my parenting has to be very different. Well, yes and no. Don't you love psychologists? In the sense that, yes, you're going to confront issues and behavior that perhaps you wouldn't confront with a normally developing child. I got that. Okay, I got that. But no, in the sense that, say, a parent will say to me, well, he's 10 years old. We've had him tested developmentally, and he functions at about a 5-year-old level. Do we discipline him? And I say, would you discipline a 5-year-old? Well, yes. Well, then you discipline him. You discipline him as you would a 5-year-old. Okay. He may not be able to write a sophisticated essay like a 10-year-old would, but he could write sentences. He could stand in a corner. You still discipline him. I've had a lot of parents, Brian, this happens all the time. I have a chapter in one of my very early books talking about this. He's a special child. And their view is life has already ripped this kid off. Therefore, I can't ask him to dry the dishes too.
Yeah, yeah.
I see that a lot. This excessive permissiveness because the child is quote unquote special needs and he gets frustrated easily, or maybe he doesn't have the social relationships that you would hope he would have. So therefore, you feel bad about his development and you allow him to throw fits when he's 9 years old. You allow him to hurt his sister because he's frustrated. You allow him to scream at his mother because he's mad. None of that helps him.
Really, aren't we aggravating and making the condition worse instead of thinking that's the solution?
Well, I always say this to parents. I say, okay, you love your son and you recognize some of the things he has to deal with. But when he's 20 years old, somebody's not going to say, well, he's special needs and that's really why he doesn't come to work. Or he's special needs and that's really why he punched me. I guess I can tolerate that. No, the world will not tolerate it. Right. The parents did, but what they're doing is they're setting him up to be disciplined by the world, and the world hurts.
Ray, if you would show your book again and
Sure.
Tell us where they can get it. And you've got so much on your website as well.
That's a picture of the kids, Brian.
Really?
When they were all, let's see, Lizzie looks to be about 1.5 years there. And Andrew, the oldest, he looks to be about 13. So that's when they were all kind of, well, they were at home, and see all the stockings back there. We had the gang. And, Brian, I was on a talk show one time, and it was talking about how do you discipline teenagers. I gave a suggestion, and there was a mother there who immediately said, do you have any children? Because she didn't like my suggestion. And I said, yes, I have 6. At that time, we had 6. Now, the audience turned on her. They just in your face. Then she said, are any of them teenagers? I said, no, not yet. Then the audience turned on me. They were both following a myth. The nutty notion that says you have to experience something personally to be able to give somebody valid advice. Yeah, the fact that I had 10 kids, many people will say when they introduce me at a talk or something, well, his greatest credential is that he has 10 children. And I don't dispute that, but I think to myself, no, my greatest credential is that I've worked with thousands of parents and children. My own children have taught me things. However, my knowledge is based on a much broader sample. If I only had my 10 kids, I'd be automatically limited to my own experiences with 10, as opposed to hundreds and hundreds of parents and hundreds of kids in a wide range of situations. Before I had kids, I was a psychologist. For 3 or 4 years, I did parenting advice. Many of the things I said then parallel what I say now. I just didn't have any kids yet.
Right.
You know what the interesting thing about that, Brian, when people say, well, have you ever been? When they do something like that, what they're really saying is, I want to invalidate your advice because I don't want to hear it.
Right. So true. Well, your book, Ray, you just held up, Taught by 10, a psychologist's father learns from his 10 kids, is available at drray.com. Now, Dr. Ray, any closing thoughts here before we wrap up today's show?
My wife and I, Brian, did not set out to have 10 children. I came home from Cleveland Clinic and I told her, the urologist said, we will never conceive. I was 34 years old. At that point, biologically, probably we would have had 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 more children. That was it. We would have run out the clock. We said to each other, well, I guess we can try to adopt. We'll do what we can to try to adopt. And then with each kid, we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what do you think? 1 more? I mean, what's 1 more? 5 to 6 is only 20% increase. 9 to 10 is only 11% increase. Okay, we can do that. I always tell people it's kind of like eating potato chips. You think you can eat 1 more till you throw up. But we didn't set out to have 10. On my wedding day, if somebody would have said to me, you know, you're going to have 10 kids, I'd have taken out my wallet and said, you see this picture? This is me here. Now, I think you're thinking of somebody else in the wedding party here. I don't know who you're talking about. Hey, God had better plans for us. And I always tell people, I got some kids going to serve the church. I got some probably going to serve time, you know? It's a wide range.
Yeah. Well, you know, Dr. Ray, you're doing great work. You're writing a lot of very helpful books for people just trying to get through life and marriage and children, and your counseling in your course on EW10 and at conferences. And I just encourage you to keep up the great work. And you let me know anytime the next book comes out, and we'd love to have you back on. And people, I hope you enjoyed the show. Spread it, share it, go get Dr. Ray's book, and just know that God loves us all right where they're at. And that's what we have to do with our kids. Just love them right where they're at. So thank you all for joining me today on Mercy Unbound, and we hope to see you next time. God bless. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbryanThatcher.com.